I was standing in the middle of a warehouse store with a giant package of paper towels in my cart when I had one of those embarrassingly simple realizations that makes you wonder how long you've been doing something without ever questioning it. I was 52. I had been shopping for groceries and household supplies for decades, and somewhere along the way, I had absorbed one rule so completely that I barely even thought about it anymore. Bigger meant cheaper. If there were 2 boxes of cereal, I reached for the bigger one. If there were 2 bottles of detergent, I assumed the giant bottle was the smarter choice. If meat came in a family pack, I figured I was saving money before I had even looked at the numbers. That afternoon, I happened to glance down at the unit price label on the shelf, and for the first time in a long time, I actually stopped and read it. The difference between the regular package and the oversized package was tiny. On another item, the larger package was almost exactly the same price per ounce. And a few aisles later, I found something that surprised me even more. The bigger package was actually more expensive per unit. I remember thinking, wait a minute, wasn't buying in bulk supposed to be one of the easiest ways to save money? I had spent years feeling responsible every time I came home with oversized packages stacked in the back of the car. I thought I was beating inflation, avoiding future price increases, and making fewer trips to the store, but suddenly I started wondering how much of that saving was real, and how much of it was just a habit I had never bothered to calculate. The truth is, bulk buying made perfect sense during certain stages of my life, when there were more people eating at home, when lunches had to be packed every morning, when cereal disappeared in 3 days, when paper towels somehow vanished faster than I could replace them. Buying the larger package often saved both time and money, but my household at 52 didn't look exactly like it had years earlier. The number of people eating at home had changed, my routines had changed, the amount of food we actually used had changed. But my shopping habits had stayed almost exactly the same, and that was the first thing that bothered me. I was still shopping for an old version of my household, not the one I actually lived in today. At the same time, grocery shopping in America had become more complicated. Even after the extreme price jumps of the pandemic years had cooled, food prices were still moving, and they weren't moving evenly. Some categories were climbing faster. Others were relatively stable. Some products that used to feel inexpensive had become noticeably more costly. By the summer of 2026, food-at-home prices were still higher than a year earlier, and anyone who shops regularly could feel that pressure in the cart. But what I began to understand was that rising prices made it even more important to stop shopping on autopilot, because when prices change unevenly, old rules become unreliable. Buying the biggest package doesn't protect you if the unit price isn't actually better. Buying 3 months' worth doesn't save you money if part of it expires. And spending $25 today to save 80 cents over time might not be the brilliant bargain it feels like in the aisle. So I started looking at my cart differently. Instead of asking how much more I could get for my money, I started asking how much of what I was buying I would realistically use. Instead of looking at the size of the package, I looked at the tiny numbers on the shelf label, and instead of feeling proud because my cart was full, I started wondering whether a smaller cart might actually leave more money in my bank account. What surprised me most was that this wasn't really a story about warehouse stores or giant packages. It was a story about how easily a money-saving rule can outlive the circumstances that once made it useful. I had been assuming bigger was cheaper for so long that I had stopped checking whether it was still true, and once I finally started doing the math, I discovered that some of the purchases I had considered my smartest bargains were quietly costing me more than the smaller packages sitting right beside them. Once I started looking at unit prices instead of package sizes, grocery shopping became almost like learning a new language. Because suddenly I wasn't comparing a $6 box to a $10 box anymore. I was comparing 24 cents per ounce to 27 cents per ounce, 11 cents per sheet to 13 cents per sheet, 18 cents per load to 21 cents per load. And that tiny shift changed more than I expected. I started with the obvious things: cereal, coffee, detergent, paper towels, toilet paper, cheese, frozen chicken, olive oil, trash bags. The kinds of things I had always assumed were cheaper when the package got bigger, and sometimes they were, but not nearly as consistently as I had believed. One week the family-sized cereal really was the best deal. The next week the smaller box was on promotion and beat it easily. One brand of detergent offered a real discount in the larger bottle, another barely changed the cost per load at all. I even found situations where the oversized package carried a higher unit price than the smaller one sitting right next to it. And once you notice that, it becomes very hard to go back to shopping the old way, because words like value pack, family size, mega, and club size suddenly stop looking like mathematical information and start looking like what they really are. Descriptions on a package, they may signal more product, but they do not guarantee a better price. And the shelf label became more important to me than the giant letters printed on the box. The strange part is that unit pricing in America is not as uniform as many shoppers might assume. NIST publishes national best practice guidance for retailers and a model uniform unit pricing regulation, but adoption is not the same everywhere. Some jurisdictions require unit pricing, while many others do not. So depending on where you shop, the information can be easier or harder to compare. And even when stores provide it voluntarily, one product might be listed by ounce, while another similar product is listed by pound or by count, which means you still have to slow down and make sure you are comparing the same thing. NIST has continued updating its guidance because clear and consistent unit pricing can help consumers compare value, and that matters even more in a period when package sizes, promotions, and grocery prices are changing at different speeds. I began treating the unit price almost like the truth hidden underneath the advertising. If I was comparing coffee, I checked the cost per ounce. If I was buying detergent, I looked at the cost per load rather than the size of the bottle. If I was buying trash bags, I divided the price by the number of bags. If I was buying meat, I looked at the price per pound, and suddenly some of my old bargains didn't look impressive at all. Sometimes I was spending another $8 or $10 simply to get a larger quantity while saving only a few cents on each unit. And that made me ask a question I had rarely asked before. How long will it take me to recover that extra money? Because a discount only matters if the quantity fits the way you actually live. That became especially clear with products whose prices had been moving differently. Coffee could feel painfully expensive while another category might barely change. So assuming that the biggest package in every aisle offered the same kind of savings made no sense. I had been trying to use one shopping rule across dozens of completely different products, when each product really needed its own little calculation. And the more I did that calculation, the more I realized that stores had trained me to notice the total amount I was getting before I noticed what each ounce, roll, load, or serving actually cost. Once I reversed that habit, my decisions got slower for a few shopping trips. But they also got much clearer. Sometimes I still walked out with the giant package because the numbers genuinely supported it, but other times I chose the medium size. Sometimes I bought the smaller package on sale, and sometimes I simply walked away because none of the options looked like a good value. That felt very different from the way I used to shop. I was no longer buying bulk because bulk sounded frugal. I was buying it only when the math proved it was frugal. But then I ran into an even more uncomfortable realization, because even when the big package really did have the lowest unit price, that still didn't mean it was the cheapest choice for my household. I could buy something at the best price per ounce in the entire store and still lose money on it, because there was one number the shelf label could never tell me how much of that giant package I was actually going to use before the rest of it ended up stale, spoiled, forgotten, or buried somewhere in the back of my kitchen. The next lesson was harder for me to admit, because checking the unit price was easy. Admitting that I was wasting some of what I bought was not. One Saturday morning, I opened my refrigerator and really looked at what was inside, instead of just reaching for breakfast. There was half a container of spinach pitch pushed behind the milk, already starting to turn soft. There were berries I had bought in a large package because the price per ounce looked fantastic, except some of them had gone bad before I got around to eating them. There was a giant bottle of sauce that had seemed like such a bargain 6 weeks earlier, a bag of shredded cheese that had been opened and forgotten, and when I checked the freezer, I found another collection of good intentions: meat buried underneath other packages, frozen vegetables with ice crystals covering the inside of the bag, bread I couldn't remember buying, and several things I had stocked up on because I was absolutely certain I would use them someday. That was when I realized there was a number missing from every unit price labels in the store. The label could tell me what I paid per ounce, but it could never tell me how much of those ounces I would actually eat. And once I understood that, I started thinking about the true cost of food differently. Imagine I buy the smaller package for $8 and use every bit of it. Then imagine I buy the bulk package for $12 because it offers a better price per ounce, but a third of it goes bad before I can finish it. Mathematically, I may have bought the cheaper product. Practically, I spent $4 extra and ended up throwing part of my money into the trash. That is the strange thing about bulk buying. We usually calculate the savings when the item enters the cart, not when the item finally leaves the kitchen, and those can be two completely different calculations. I began using a much simpler rule. The real cost of something isn't just what I paid divided by how much I bought. It's what I paid divided by how much I actually used. That little idea changed the way I looked at everything from produce to snacks to condiments. And when I started paying attention, I realized this wasn't only happening in my kitchen. Food waste is a surprisingly expensive problem across America. The EPA estimates that the average U.S. consumer loses about $728 a year to uneaten food, roughly $14 a week. And for a family of 4, the annual amount approaches $3,000. The agency also estimates that around 11% of household food spending is wasted, which made me think about how hard people work to save 10 cents here, 50 cents there, clipping digital coupons, waiting for sales, driving across town for a cheaper price, while sometimes hundreds of dollars are quietly disappearing from the refrigerator at home. USDA continues to estimate that roughly 30 to 40% of the U.S. food supply is lost or wasted. Although that figure covers much more than what happens inside an individual household, it includes losses across different parts of the food system, but it still reminded me that waste is not some tiny side issue. It is part of the economics of food in America. And for me, the important part wasn't feeling guilty about a bag of spinach. Guilt wasn't going to lower my grocery bill, changing my habits might, so I stopped asking myself, could I possibly use this much? Because almost anything sounds possible when you're standing under bright store lights looking at a bargain. Instead, I started asking, based on what I actually ate last week, will I finish this before it loses quality? That question immediately eliminated a lot of bulk purchases, especially fresh produce, unfamiliar foods, huge snack packages, oversized sauces, and anything I was buying, because I imagined a future version of myself who cooked more often than I really did. I also learned that bulk buying works beautifully when consumption is predictable. If I know I use something every week, it stores well, and the unit price savings are meaningful. Buying more can make perfect sense. But if my consumption is unpredictable, the large package becomes a gamble. And the discount is only real if I win that gamble by using everything. That was probably the biggest change in my thinking. I stopped treating waste as a separate problem from grocery prices. Because if food prices rise 5%, but I throw away 10% of what I buy, then the bigger problem in my own kitchen may not be inflation at all. It may be the food I paid for but never consumed. And once I started buying quantities that matched my actual life instead of my ambitions, my refrigerator became easier to see into. My freezer stopped feeling like long-term storage for forgotten bargains, and I started finishing things before replacing them. But even then, I wasn't finished questioning the bulk buying habit because I soon realized that spoilage was only one hidden cost. There were other costs I had never included in my calculations at all. The space required to store everything, the extra freezer running in the garage, the membership fee, the drive across town, and most importantly, the amount of cash I was giving up today just to save a few dollars sometime in the future. Once I stopped thinking only about what I paid at the register, I started noticing another side of bulk buying that I had almost completely ignored. The hidden costs that never appear on the shelf tag, because a giant package doesn't just need money, it needs somewhere to go. And over the years, I had slowly turned parts of my house into storage for things I bought because they were supposedly cheaper. Extra paper products stacked in a closet, canned food filling shelves in the basement, detergent bottles lined up in the laundry room, frozen meat packed into the garage freezer. And at some point, I had to ask myself a ridiculous but useful question. How much space was I willing to give up just to save a few dollars? Because storage is not completely free, especially when the thing doing the storing uses electricity. That old freezer in the garage had always felt like a symbol of smart planning. Buy meat on sale, freeze it, save money later, and that can absolutely work. But the freezer still has to run every hour of every day, and electricity itself has become more expensive. Nationwide residential electricity prices in May 2026 were about 6.2% higher than a year earlier, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. So while I would never blame one freezer for my entire utility bill, I finally understood that the true economics of stocking up included more than the price printed on the package. Then there was the drive, because some of my favorite bulk buying trips weren't to the grocery store 5 minutes from home. They were longer trips to warehouse stores, which meant fuel, mileage, traffic, and time. Sometimes I would tell myself I was saving $20 on the cart, without considering that I had driven across town specifically to spend $200. And this is where the enormous American supply system becomes part of the story, too. Almost everything sitting on those warehouse shelves had already traveled through a freight network of highways, railroads, ports, pipelines, airports, warehouses, and distribution centers before I ever touched it. In May 2026, the U.S. Department of Transportation released a new National Freight Strategic Plan, describing a freight system moving more than 54 million tons of goods, worth roughly $68 billion every day, and the plan focuses on improving the reliability, efficiency, connectivity, and resilience of that network. That doesn't mean I can look at a box of cereal and calculate exactly how much transportation added to its price. Retail pricing is much more complicated than that, but it reminded me that the products in my cart exist inside a massive system of transportation, fuel, labor, storage, and distribution costs, and when those pressures change, I can't assume every package size will change proportionally. Then I thought about taxes, another thing that can disappear inside the checkout total because state and local sales tax systems vary across the country. The IRS maintains state and local sales tax tables and calculators precisely because those taxes differ depending on where people live, which means two Americans buying the same combination of household goods can face different tax environments. But the hidden cost that mattered most to me wasn't electricity, gasoline, storage, or even taxes. It was cash flow. Because when I bought 6 months of something at once, I was paying for 6 months of consumption today. Suppose the small package costs $8 and the bulk package costs $24. Maybe the bulk version really is cheaper per unit, but $24 still leaves my checking account today. And if I repeat that decision across detergent, toilet paper, meat, coffee, snacks, canned food, and cleaning supplies, I can easily turn a shopping trip into hundreds of dollars of future consumption sitting around my house. At 52, that started to bother me more than it had when I was younger. Because every dollar has competition now. Retirement savings wants that dollar, the insurance bill wants it, the property tax bill wants it, the car repair wants it, the roof eventually wants it. Maybe an adult child needs help, maybe an aging parent does. Maybe I simply want more breathing room between paychecks. And suddenly, saving $3 over the next 4 months doesn't automatically feel like a victory if I have to spend an extra $20 today to get it. That was when bulk buying finally became clear to me. There are really two prices. There is the price per unit, and there is the price of committing your money, your storage space, and sometimes your time to that purchase. I still buy plenty of things in larger quantities, but now they have to earn their place in my cart. Because I realized I didn't need another rule telling me that bulk was good or bulk was bad. What I needed was a simple way to decide when buying more was actually worth it. And eventually I narrowed that decision down to 5 questions that completely changed the way I shop. After a few months of paying closer attention, I realized I didn't need a complicated spreadsheet or a calculator every time I walked into a store. I just needed a better set of questions. Because the old question, is the bigger package cheaper, was too simple. It ignored how I actually lived, how quickly I used things, how much cash I had available, and whether the supposed savings were even meaningful. So I came up with 5 questions that I now run through almost automatically before I buy anything in bulk. The first question is the most obvious one. Is the unit price actually lower? Not does the package look bigger? Not does it say value size? Not is there a yellow sign hanging underneath it? But is cost per ounce, per pound, per load, per roll, or per item genuinely lower? If the difference is only a few pennies, I don't automatically consider that a win anymore. Because saving 3 cents per ounce doesn't impress me if I have to spend $15 extra today to get the bigger package. The second question is, will I realistically use all of it? And I emphasize realistically because this is where I used to fool myself. I would stand in the store imagining all the salads I was going to make, all the meals I was going to cook, all the snacks everyone would eat. But now I look backward instead of forward. How much did we actually use last week? How much did we use last month? If I normally finish 1 small container of something every 3 weeks, buying 4 of them at once is not automatically planning ahead. Sometimes it is simply buying faster than I consume. The third question is, how long will this last once I open it? And this question has saved me from a surprising number of bad purchases. Dry rice and canned beans are one thing. A huge container of berries, an oversized bottle of salad dressing, nuts, cooking oils, shredded cheese, or a giant bag of something that goes stale quickly are something else entirely. Shelf life matters, freezer space matters, and once something is opened, the clock starts moving. So I stopped thinking only about how long food can technically survive in the pantry and started thinking about whether I will still want to eat it before the quality drops. The fourth question is, do I already have something like this at home? Because bulk buying becomes especially expensive when you accidentally buy duplicates. I used to come home with another jar of peanut butter, another bag of rice, another pack of paper towels, then discover that I already had one hidden behind something else. So now before I shop, I look through the pantry, refrigerator, freezer, bathroom cabinet, and laundry area. I shop my house first. And that one habit has probably prevented more unnecessary purchases than any coupon ever did. The fifth question is the one I wish I had asked years ago. Is the savings big enough to justify giving up the cash today? Because there is a difference between saving money and merely spending money earlier. If I spend $30 now to avoid spending $33 over the next 4 months, yes, technically I save $3. but I also tied up $30 today. And depending on what else is happening in my life, I might value that cash more than the discount, especially now that I think more carefully about retirement, insurance, home repairs, utility bills, car maintenance, and all the little expenses that seem to show up when you least expect them. Once I started using these 5 questions, I noticed that certain things still made sense to buy in larger quantities: rice that I use constantly, oats, canned staples I know I will eat, toilet paper, trash bags, laundry detergent when the cost per load is clearly better, maybe meat when the price is good, and I already have freezer space. But other things stopped earning a place in the bulk category: fresh produce I struggle to finish, snacks I only buy because they are on sale, giant bottles of sauces I use twice a month, unfamiliar foods, or anything I am buying because I hope I will suddenly become a different kind of cook. And that distinction became incredibly freeing because I stopped seeing bulk buying as a personality trait. I didn't have to be the kind of person who always stocked up, and I didn't have to swing to the other extreme and avoid large packages completely. I could simply buy the amount that made sense for the way I live now. And something interesting happened after I started doing that. My cart got smaller, my pantry looked less crowded, my freezer became easier to manage, and yet somehow I felt like I had more, not less, because nearly everything in my kitchen had a purpose. Nearly everything was getting used. And for the first time in a long time, the money I saved wasn't hiding in a giant package on a shelf. It was still sitting in my bank account. The strangest thing about changing the way I bought in bulk was that I expected my kitchen to feel emptier. I thought fewer giant packages would somehow make me feel less prepared, less frugal, maybe even a little irresponsible, because for years I had associated a full pantry and an overflowing freezer with security. If the shelves were packed, I felt like I was ahead. If I had 6 months of something stored away, I felt like I had beaten the system. But after I stopped assuming bigger was always cheaper, the opposite happened. My cart got smaller, my shelves got less crowded, and somehow I felt more in control because I could finally see what I owned. I knew what needed to be used first. I stopped discovering forgotten food behind other food, and I stopped confusing quantity with value. That was probably the biggest lesson of this entire experiment. The goal was never to stop buying in bulk. Bulk buying can still be a smart strategy, especially for something I use consistently, something that stores well, and something with a meaningful unit price advantage. The goal was to stop treating bulk as automatically smart, because there is a huge difference between buying more because the math makes sense and buying more because the package makes you feel like you are saving. Once I understood that, I started noticing how many financial decisions work the same way. We often focus on the visible discount and ignore the invisible commitment. We celebrate saving $5 without noticing that we had to spend $40 more today to get it. We buy enough food for an imaginary future household instead of the household we actually have. We fill closets, garages, freezers, and cabinets with products that seem like bargains at the moment. Then months later, we are still trying to use them. And at 52, I no longer want my money sitting around the house, disguised as inventory, unless there is a good reason for it to be there. I want some of that money available for the things that matter more now: retirement contributions, an unexpected repair, an insurance deductible, helping someone in my family when it really matters, or simply having enough breathing room that an ordinary Tuesday expense doesn't feel like an emergency. And that is why the phrase cheaper per ounce no longer ends the conversation for me. It starts the conversation, because after the unit price, I still have to ask whether I will use it, whether I can store it, whether I already own it, whether it will spoil, and whether the savings are worth giving up the cash today. Once I began shopping this way, I also stopped feeling the need to chase every sale. If the giant package of coffee is discounted, but I already have enough coffee for 3 weeks, I can walk past it If the warehouse store has a huge bag of produce at an amazing price, but I know half of it will spoil, I can buy the smaller bag somewhere else without feeling like I failed at being frugal. If the larger detergent really does save me money per load, and I know I will use every drop, then I can buy it confidently. The decision becomes calmer because I am no longer letting the size of the package make the decision for me. And in an American economy where grocery prices, utility bills, insurance costs, transportation expenses, and household budgets can all change at different speeds, that kind of flexibility matters. I cannot control what a manufacturer charges next month. I cannot control what happens to fuel prices or freight costs. I cannot control whether one grocery category rises faster than another, but I can control whether I buy more than I need, whether I compare the numbers, and whether I allow a big red sales sign to turn an ordinary purchase into a $100 stock-up trip. And that feels like a much more useful form of frugality than simply filling the house with discounted things. Looking back, I think the old version of me believed saving money meant getting the largest amount possible for every dollar. Now I think saving money is getting the right amount for the life I actually live, using nearly all of it, and keeping the rest of my cash available for something more important. The cheapest thing in the store is not always the product with the lowest price per ounce. Sometimes the cheapest thing is the product you buy at a fair price, completely use, and never have to throw away. And that is why I stopped assuming bigger was cheaper at 52. Not because bulk buying is bad, but because automatic bulk buying was costing me more than I realized. So now I want to hear from you. What is one thing you used to buy in bulk because you assumed it was cheaper, but later realized you were wasting money, food space, or all three? Tell me in the comments, because I have a feeling every one of us has at least one item like that hiding somewhere in the house. And if you are trying to make your money stretch further after 50 without making your life feel smaller, subscribe and join me here, because we are going to keep questioning the old money rules, keeping the ones that still work, and letting go of the ones that quietly stopped working a long time ago.